record on my computer. All right. Part 8 with Adam Fitzgerald. What's going on, man?
Hey, Tommy, we're already at part 8.
I know. It's man, this is some information. And I've never gotten as much feedback from episodes as I have from the 9/11 episodes we've been doing.
Yeah, I remember you telling me last time when we did part 7, that you were getting feedback. Now, of course, I'm too naive when it comes to viral media, so I don't know what type of feedback we get, because I only have Twitter
Yeah.
as my major, so I don't get much in the way of feedback. But yeah, you're getting some attention, huh?
Yeah, well, I have a Discord that I have set up,
Right. Yeah.
and so I talk with a lot of my listeners through Discord, and I'm also on Telegram and Signal, and so people reach out to me in different avenues, and I've been, this is one of those, probably about after part 5, people started reaching out going, man, this is so good. And I'm like, yeah, Adam's pretty amazing. He's an encyclopedia. So
Well, thanks for the adulations. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, and believe me, I torture myself every day just about, and there's a lot to learn. One thing about misconceptions of 9/11 is that people think it's just like, oh, it's just September 11th, 2001. But if you branch out to the number of subjects and events that are leading up to it,
mm,
it's really expansive. And I've taken it to an extreme where I want to understand everything I can. And I probably just barely scratched the surface. And to other people, it may seem like a lot. It is. I mean, but you know, uh, it's it's important to learn the context that 9/11 deserves, and unfortunately, it hasn't been given that context generally. And like I said, I can name you just I could refer you to certain people, and one of them being Paul Thompson, who I consider the best researcher for 9/11, him and DJ Thermodetonator. But I mean, there's hardly anyone I would recommend, and it's sad because uh, this is such an enormous event that has affected every single body,
mm,
and that it's treated like it's some comedy of errors. And that's, I blame Alex Jones and the others for that over the years and what they did. And what I'm trying to do with, thanks to you, Tommy, with doing the series, we try to reach as many people as we can. And what I'm hoping for is what I always tell people is that, I want other people to encapsulate and build their own channels, and they could reach a bigger audience. And that's how you build an educated movement, and we need
mm.
it sorely in this venture.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, today's the topic that you've been waiting to get into, and I'm sure a lot of my listeners are ready to dive into and learn a lot about. It's the NSA, and what did they know? When did they know it? How did they find out? All those good questions are going to probably be answered in one form or another here.
Yes, this is the agency that escapes most people, um, and it's also an agency that a lot of people are still, mysterious about, very inquisitive about. We know about the CIA, we know about the FBI, we know about the Saudi GID to an extent, we know
Mm,
about the Israeli Mossad, but what do we really know about the NSA? And there is a lot more questions than answers, unfortunately. And I know that, people out there listening are like, oh, well, isn't that always the case? Well, in the extent of the NSA, it's more so because this is the agency that would have the most information about the terrorism incidents, not just 9/11, but the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the 1998 East Africa bombings, Pachinko plot, and all the other Arab fundamentalist plots that were known to the intelligence services. But how were they known? Well, they were known because of signals intelligence. And who's the lead agency when it comes to signals intelligence? It's the NSA. And there is a lot of mystery when it comes to the history of the NSA in regards to what did they know and when did they come to know it regarding Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. And what I would say is that there is a point that we know of. And the most prominent point I could probably would like to start with is 1996. Now, according to whoever you want to listen to, some people within the CIA, the agency itself, say that the NSA started tapping phone lines belonging to Al Qaeda in 1992. But what we do know from the public record is that they were monitoring satellite phones belonging to bin Laden and Al Qaeda in 96. And how do we know that? Well, because in the summer of 96, there was an operative inside the United States named Ziad Khalil, who was a almost like an agent for Hamas inside the United States. He was to purchase a satellite phone for a friend, quote unquote friend. He didn't know the name of the person, but the request came from a person living in London named Khalid Al Fawaz, who is a very notable Saudi who was appointed to head the London based office of Al Qaeda in London. And he also promoted a constructive reform in Saudi Arabia for Wahhabism. Now, Khalil, also Ziad Khalil, he was from Virginia in the United States. And he actually looked very high and low for computers and phones for this friend, not knowing that this friend was actually Osama bin Laden, but he didn't know that. So he found a phone through a Long Island storefront that sold him a Compact M satellite phone, and the name of the store was O'Gara Satellite Networks. And you know, back then, you know, cell phones are very small nowadays. Back then, a cell phone was really big. It was like huge, and you had to be rich to get one.
I always think of Miami Vice and the bag phone he had in his car.
Right, exactly. It was huge. He had to
like
hold it with two hands.
Yeah, like a briefcase.
Right. And like the antenna was huge too. It was like big. I mean, it was just like ridiculously big. But they were very expensive. And he spent $7,000. And it was a top of the line Compact M satellite phone. And he also bought a laptop computer. The number that was assigned to the phone was 873-682-505-331. And how do we know that? Well, unbeknownst to Khalid Al Fawaz, the FBI was running a separate operation, which I think was part of an operation called Volga Betrayal. I'm not too sure that that was part of it, but at the time, it fit with the time frame, which was an FBI agent by the name of Robert Wright, who basically was tasked to find money trails for Arab fundamentalism and businesses in the United States. And what he uncovered was that, you know, there was a number of businesses linked to Hamas and Al Qaeda and Hezbollah. Nevertheless, this FBI agent found out that Khalid Al Fawaz bought a satellite phone. So they don't do signals intelligence, the FBI. So the FBI reached out to the NSA and said, is it possible to track this number and to try and monitor it on your end using your satellites? And to their surprise, the phone that they bought was a decrypted phone, meaning that calls were not protected by a wall. So the NSA could indeed listen to these phone calls as they are transmitted to the satellites in space. So when the phone was bought, the phone number was active, and then it was mailed to Khalid Al Fawaz, who was at the time visiting the state of Missouri. Fawaz then mailed that phone to Tora Bora, Afghanistan. And only Fawaz knew who this phone was going to, and it was going to Osama bin Laden. Now that the FBI and the NSA knew about this transaction, they started monitoring all the phone calls that were made on this phone, and that the phone, the intelligence agencies didn't know who was on this phone, but lo and behold, the NSA found out that the phone went straight to Osama bin Laden. That they didn't tell the FBI this, but bin Laden began using the phone almost immediately. And according to the prosecution transcripts of an Al Qaeda financier by the name of Wadi al Hajj, the calls went to many high profile Al Qaeda members all across the world, and also to Khalid al Fawaz. And what we do know from the testimony of Wadi al Hajj, and also another Al Qaeda founder, Jamal al Fadl, who was actually an FBI informant and an original Al Qaeda member, there were more than 200 calls placed to a house in Yemen, in which I've already talked to you about, which was the Al Qaeda Yemen hub owned by a man by the name of Ahmed al Hada. 100 of those calls were placed to countries like Sudan and Iran. About 60 calls were placed to Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Baku, Azerbaijan. 16 calls went to Kenya. 4 calls went to Wadi al Hajj in Nairobi, Kenya, where there was a safe house where bin Laden was deported from. 6 calls went to various locations inside the United States, and 4 calls went to Malaysia. But the one number that was given the most attention to was this house in Yemen. And the NSA red flagged this number, meaning that this number was high profile, meaning it was important because bin Laden was calling it and they were calling bin Laden. And they wanted to know, all right, why is bin Laden calling this number? And who is this person? So the NSA began monitoring the phone in Yemen, and it belonged to a person by the name of Ahmed al Hada. And for those who don't know, there was a person living inside that house who was married to his daughter at the time. This person would later be known as Khalid al-Mihdhar, who is actually one of the alleged hijackers of American Airlines Flight 77. So the NSA began collecting a ton of metadata regarding all the incoming and outgoing phone calls, starting from 1996 to 2001. Now, the number belonging to the Yemen hub was known throughout the trial of Mohammed Daoud al-Ohali, who was one of the bombers of the 1998 East Africa bombings, and he lived. But the Guardian, a British tabloid, actually published this number remarkably in a 1998 edition. So, in other words, the Yemen hub number, of which Al Qaeda was calling through, was published in 1998 without the knowledge of Al Qaeda. The number was 967-1-200-578. I was my co-researcher and co-host of the Darkened Hour, Richard Cox, told me this, and I couldn't believe it that the Guardian, in 3 years prior to 9/11 attacks, posted the number of the most important number in the world at the time in regards to counterintelligence and counterterrorism.
That's crazy.
Nevertheless, yeah, isn't that something? I mean, I can't believe it. Just months after being expelled from the Sudan, bin Laden had declared his first fatwa against the United States. And it was entitled Declaration of Jihad Against the Americans Occupying the Land of the Two Holiest Sites. And it was made on August 23rd, 1996. And it showed bin Laden's dissatisfaction for the Saudis' kingdoms to have kuffar, which is Arabic for a non-believer, to stay in the most holiest of all Muslim countries in the world, Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia, which was the US military was stationed there. And statements made by bin Laden were known to the NSA and the CIA at the time. and soon caught wind throughout the entire international intelligence community. But really, hardly anyone knew about this mysterious Saudi bin Laden, save for the two agencies that gave him the primary attention he should have gotten by everybody else, and that was the NSA and the CIA. But the NSA probably knew more about Al Qaeda bin Laden than any agency on the face of the earth. And this is the reason why I think this episode is going to be important, because what should be made available to the public is the information the NSA had collected, especially the phone calls made by bin Laden's satellite phone and that house in Yemen. Because what I would say to you is that if these people were talking about terrorist operations, well, the NSA would be the lead agent.
Oh, crap.
Would say in his lectures that the NSA at one point
Hold on.
collected so much metadata that they could have stopped 9/11 altogether.
Hold on 1 second, man. You
Yeah.
We had a interruption in the internet.
Oh,
Yeah, and you cut out for a second. And let me just make sure. Okay. So you were saying where you cut off, you were saying the NSA was the lead agency.
yeah. The NSA was the lead agency in regards to collecting metadata, and they had listened to the phone calls of bin Laden, the satellite phone, and this house in Yemen. And just use your imagination here. What do you think these people were talking about on these phones? And it's not like every day, like me and you, Tommy, where we talk about like mundane things or trivial things. These people are serious men, and they're talking about
We're
operations.
serious too. We're talking about what the NSA is operating in. We're
Yeah,
talking
so,
about their
well,
operations.
True. But I think you understand the gist I'm trying to get. Right? These people don't mess around.
Well,
So-
right. They have the power to do something about it.
Right.
All we
Right,
can do
exactly.
is the only thing we run is our mouth.
That's it. I'm full of hot air, by the way. So, nevertheless, that's just not me saying this, but the former senior executive of the NSA and the most important whistleblower of our time, Thomas Drake, in his lectures, basically would say that the NSA had collected so much metadata, so much where they couldn't read it all, that if it was shared to the proper agencies in the United States, like they should have, 9/11 would have been prevented just on the NSA's data alone, outside of any agency or organization. Now, just imagine you have the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, the Israeli Mossad, the Saudi GID, and God knows who else collecting all this information about bin Laden and Al Qaeda. There's this.
Yeah,
there's
I mean,
this,
you gotta imagine that the DIA and the DNI were
Oh, yeah.
involved too.
Naval danger.
Somehow, right.
Right. Now, just imagine if just imagine, Tom, and anybody else listening, that all these agencies I just named shared all the data that they had that started in the early 90s with each other. Just imagine how far they could have gotten in stopping every single terrorist incident that were successful. Never mind the ones that weren't successful. The ones that weren't successful wasn't because the intelligence agencies shared that information. It was because, there was a bungling error on the part of the co-conspirators. Now, to go back to the NSA, after the Fat War of '96, the NSA continued to listen to the house in Yemen and bin Laden's satellite phone. Now, bin Laden was the only one using this phone. You had Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and the second emir of Al Qaeda. You had the military commander of Al Qaeda, Abu Hafs al-Masri, also known as Mohammed Atef. He was using this phone. And other high-level people in Al Qaeda, like Abu Hafs al-Masri, Abu Muhammad al-Masri, other people too, Abu Ubaidah al-Iraqi, a lot of other people that were using this phone. And you can only imagine what these people were talking about. Now, the CIA got wind. Now, the CIA also had agents on loan to the NSA working on that project. And one of their agents basically said, hey, listen, the NSA are collecting an enormous amount of data on bin Laden and Al Qaeda. Now, the CIA, they sort of do signals intelligence, but they do human intelligence. They have cable traffickers, cable readers, information sharers, information officers. So when the CIA found out that there was so much metadata, the chief of ALEC Station, which is the Bin Laden issue station, a subsection of the counterterrorism unit, Michael Scheuer went to the NSA's deputy director at the time, Barbara McNamara, and said, hey, we already have a bug inside the Yemen home, but what we don't have is a bug on the phone. Could you give us the other half of the transcript? So, because we have the other half, because we can listen to the person inside the house who's on the phone. But what they couldn't do was listen to the phone itself because they don't have a tap. So McNamara said no. And one thing about Michael Scheuer is he's like a bulldog. He doesn't take no for an answer. And he's very aggressive. So he kept pushing. And McNamara basically said, if you somehow want to take this to the courts or you want to take this to supervisors and you're trying to blow our cover, I'll make sure that your life is a living hell and, we'll blow the whistle on you. And Ray Nowolski wrote a magnificent book, and it's one of the most important books I've ever read regarding this particular story. It's called The Watchdogs Didn't Bark. And there's another book called Disconnecting the Dots by Kevin Fenton. These are the only books that talk about the NSA in its entirety. And this is where that argument came from through their sources. And McNamara won out. And it was very rare. What Scheuer did, he's backed away. Instead, he told the CIA to build a underground cable near the, I forgot the name of the, one of the rivers there near Madagascar, so they could so they could have a running cable inside and build a listening post so they could listen to the house in Yemen. And like I said, although the NSA states that it started tapping the Yemen hub in 98, no, that wasn't the case. They knew about this number in 96. The FBI originally thought that the NSA had gotten this number in 98. Now, why do they think that? Remember that person I told you, Muhammad al-Hohali, was the only person who survived the 98 embassy attacks because he ran away from his truck. Basically, he had a bunch of burns on his back, and he went to the hospital. And the hospital, knew what happened to the embassies, and they said, "Oh, this person, looked burned, and I think maybe he's a part." So they contacted the authorities. Authorities detained him, and the FBI went to interview him. And when one FBI agent out of New York named John Antisev went to meet with him, he basically told them the whole story and said that one of the first things I did was call this number. And he showed him this number, and it was the house in Yemen. And that was 98. According to many in the FBI, like Jack Clunan, who was a legendary counterterrorism agent out of New York, he was told by Ray Nowolski in the book that, the NSA knew about this number in 96. And it blew, Jack Clunan was floored because he was like, we thought that the NSA knew about this number in 98 because of the investigation into the bombings, and to only find out that the NSA knew about bin Laden and had a monitor operation on bin Laden's satellite phone and a house in Yemen. And they were withholding this information. And this wouldn't be the first time, Tommy, about withholding information. Now, what made bin Laden's satellite phone easy to track and listen to was, like I said, the phone wasn't encrypted. And so one thing about these agencies, and it really grinds my gears, is that later on they will complain that, we had so much information, we couldn't read it. Now, I find that hard to believe because, one, no operation on the face of the earth at that time was more important than Osama bin Laden anywhere in the world. No terrorist was more important to them were more popular at the time, especially after the East Africa bombings.
Mm.
I mean, every agency on the face of the earth knew he was. Nevertheless, one thing that this operation did was give the NSA the, according to Michael Scheuer, and this is his quote, and I'm going to read the quote, and it's based out of the book, is that I'm trying to do it from memory. Scheuer said that the Bin Laden satellite phone was a godsend, because it gave us a general idea of what Al Qaeda was like and how they built their structure and how they operated in Afghanistan. And he said that the NSA, this is the CIA's, deputy chief of station, Alex Station, was saying that the NSA was the primary agency in the entire world when it came to Bin Laden and Al Qaeda. And this is the reason why I'm so anal when it comes to the NSA, because nobody, and I'm talking about like hardly anyone, I could count them on my hand, gives any attention to the NSA. And why do I think this is important? Because if the NSA had heard about these operations beforehand, then that would mean that the NSA knew about these operations and allowed these operations to conduct, to be successful. Now, just put that into perspective of other agencies who got wind of like the 9/11 plot. And if they heard about this plot, what could they do to the plot? Well, they can manipulate it. How so? Like, for example, if you wanted to basically say wire up the World Trade Center with bombs, well, you could do that if you knew about the plot and you knew about the date specifics. I'm talking about specifics. You knew about who was going to be involved, what targets were going to be hit, when it was going to be done. And if you knew about this all the way to the day itself, you could actually manipulate this operation without the knowledge of Al Qaeda or Bin Laden in order for it to be successful. Now, of course, I'm just speculating, but I think that's pretty reasonable to think that the NSA heard about this operation. I've always believed this. I can't prove it, but I believe that the NSA and that some people in the CIA knew about 9/11 before it even happened. I'm more so persuaded when it comes to the Saudis and Israelis because they were operating inside the United States. The NSA and CIA are not allowed by law, remember, I'm using quotation marks here, by law, not to do operations inside the country. Thanks to the Church Committee hearings of 1977, they put a clamp down on the CIA in running illegal black operations in the country.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like they don't do it, they do, but
Right.
It's against the law. But for an operation like 9/11, which is so ubiquitous and so broad that they probably needed help. Now, I'm not saying that the Israelis and Saudis were working alongside the NSA and CIA. They may very well could have been, but they also could have been doing their own separate operations, and the NSA and CIA didn't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
And they could have provided information to the CIA and NSA, but they also could have withheld information. Now, what we do know from the public record is this, that the Saudis and Israelis were collecting primary source information, both signals and human intelligence, on Al Qaeda operatives who were involved with the 9/11 planes operation and their affiliates. And what we don't know is how much information they collected, because the first thing that we did was basically arrest everybody from the moving front companies, the Saudi operatives inside the country. All these people were detained. And the first thing we did was hand them over to INS, and they deported them. Because why did we hand them over to INS? Because the first crime that they were convicted, they were charged with, was immigration violation.
Right.
That's not a Department of Justice crime. That's an INS crime.
Mm-hmm. Now, so have there been FOIA requests as far as the NSA's involvement or what the NSA knew or any of that?
Tommy, that's a great question, because I'm going to tell you right now, I'm in shock. And that we're in the year 2022, that there hasn't been an effort, or I have not seen either an effort or a part where anyone in the intelligence community that's, retired, or an investigator has ever put forth a FOIA request to collect all the transcripts by the NSA. In fact, I believe and that's not exaggeration. Believe I'm the first person to bring up the idea to file a FOIA, and I want to reach out to a lawyer and see if that could be done. In fact, that was going to be my big surprise at the end of the year. I was going to do a video, but I might as well tell you here now that I'm going to try and get a team together to bring legitimacy to my argument, because just me saying it, is not going to bring it legitimate. I'm a nobody. But if I could get some lawyers and somebody influential to, want to do this, I want to put forth, because it's either one or two things, Tommy. One, the NSA knew about the 9/11 operation and didn't stop it from happening. That means that they have foreknowledge and they had the specifics to stop it. Or two, Al Qaeda didn't talk about the operation, which would mean that Al Qaeda was not involved with 9/11. And that would mean that, hey, wait a minute, who were these people? Either way, this is not going to look good for the intelligence community or the federal government in part. So I am going to try and do my best in January to bring about some people to bring attention to a FOIA request regarding the NSA's transcripts. Now, I did bring up. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I would imagine, and just from what I know of Thomas Drake, that if he said the NSA had the capability and the knowledge to stop 9/11 just with their intelligence,
yes,
that what you would find from these taps is conversations about the 9/11 attacks. That would just be my assumption.
I'll safely assume right now, with 100% conviction, that the NSA knew about these attacks.
Yeah,
for sure. Specifics. I'm talking about specifics.
Right.
And, if we listen to some of these documentaries that came out, especially one important one by Al Jazeera, led by a great reporter, Yoshri Fuda, and I've interviewed they wrote a book called Masterminds of Terror, and I interviewed Nick Fielding, where Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Shibh, who were part of the who were the alleged masterminds of 9/11, they gave the only interview to Yoshri Fuda from Al Jazeera because he was Arab.
Yeah.
And, they talked about the planes operation to him. And they wrote a book about this incident. And what they said was that, we discussed this with our friends in Yemen. Now, if that's the case, that, they discussed this on their phones to the house in Yemen, then that means the NSA heard about this operation.
Right.
So I would be like you.
I'm actually, but I am surprised, because for Drake to come out with such conviction and say what he said about the NSA's intelligence alone could have stopped the attacks. I'm actually surprised with his connections with like journalists like Daniel Ellsberg and like these legendary journalists that none of them had bothered to file FOIA requests on this information. I
asked this question to Thomas Drake back in May of this year, and I asked him the question, and I'll read you verbatim what I said to him, because I'm on Twitter. And I said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Drake. I have a question. Is it possible that I could file a FOIA request about the NSA transcripts from the Ahmed al-Hada home in Sana'a, Yemen, or are those classified?" And he retorted to me, "You could certainly make the attempt to FOIA, but suspect the sources and methods will get in the way under Exemption 1 and Executive Order 13526 with respect to foreign intelligence, or wait until the intelligence is declassified in the future." And I said, "Thank you for the helpful reply." And what I did was I got in touch with a former leader of We Are Change LA, Ed Brotherton, who is a 9/11 investigator in his own right. And basically I said, hey, he's good with details about law and executive orders and FOIAs. So I said, Ed, is it possible you can find out about Executive Order 13526? And, he humbly accepted the challenge, and he got back to me within a couple of days and said, hey, there is a 25-year wait. And he says, we didn't pass that with the Yemen hub yet, because we certainly passed that 25-year break with the Bin Laden satellite phone, because that may have started back in 92. And I said, do you think it's worth the filing effort? If we're wrong, we're wrong. And he says, absolutely. He goes, what do you got to lose? And he says, but because there's still a damn trial in Guantanamo, that information is going to be classified. And I said, that's a really good point. If there's no trials, that means this information is either in the National Archives, and that we need permission by the State Department or the NSA to get certain things declassified. But if there's a trial, then they're using that as evidence. That means we can't see it.
They won't release it.
So we're going to wait until after the trial and file a FOIA. And that's, I think, the realistic approach here. But who knows when that's going to happen?
Right.
Because, we're past the 21-year mark now.
Yeah. I mean, how many of these guys have ever gotten trial?
Yeah. I've tried many times to find out, when this, we're ever going to get through. There's a rumor, and not many people know this, because I've interviewed one former FBI agent named Ken Williams, who wrote the Phoenix memo. And he was at some of the court appearances of the Guantanamo Five. Those are the 5 people charged in 9/11 attacks. And he basically said, I told him, I said, do you think there'll ever be a trial? And he said, in my opinion, no. And I said, really? I said, why not? He goes, they don't want a trial because of the following. One is that he thinks the federal government doesn't have much evidence. And 2, the most important, is that even though that they have confessions made by these people, all of those confessions were coerced under torture.
Yeah, under
so
duress.
That means
yeah,
everything that they have is going to be thrown out of court, and the federal government knows this.
Well, now, and also if they have a trial pending, constantly pending, for the rest of these people's lives, people like you and I can't get the information. We can't force them to release the information that's used as evidence in the trial.
Right. That's correct, Tommy. And my worry is this, Ken, and I forgot to tell you this, Ken Williams seems to think that they're going to cut a deal. And I believe it or not, he's a prophet, because 5 months later, after I interviewed him, the USA Today broke the story and said that there is rumor that the lawyers for the Guantanamo Five were in contact with the State Department, the prosecutors of the federal government, and the federal government is going to reach out to them and say, if they plead guilty to 9/11 all across the board, they'll take the death penalty off the table. And if that's the case, my worry is this: that would be the worst case outlook. And why? Because if they plead guilty, and they plead guilty to everything about 9/11, the federal government, we will never know what the federal government had as evidence, and most importantly, what they didn't have. That we are now left to questioning whether the government had enough information, or the information that they had was from torture. And if all they had was information relating to torture, that means they had nothing almost. Now, I'm not saying that they're innocent of 9/11. I happen to believe, now take this with a grain of salt, I'm speculating here, is that I happen to believe that they are guilty of plotting for 9/11. But what I also believe is this, is that the NSA, the CIA, the Israeli Mossad, and the Saudi General Intelligence Directorate all heard about the plot before it even happened and manipulated the plot in order for it to be successful. That means whatever, if you want to believe the towers came down by controlled demolition, well, they heard about the operation before it happened, they could possibly do that. The NORAD exercises happened to be on September 11th, a number of exercises to keep away from intercept jets to intercepting the hijacked flights, and that those planes crashed, but they crashed successfully. Any number of situations I could provide to you were basically conveniently successful on September 11, 2001. And we're left to the question of why. Why did we not intercept these people before it even happened? And, I know a lot of people basically say that the 9/11 Commission didn't help and, a lot of it's false. Don't fall for that. Yeah. Is everything true? No. But is everything false about 9/11 Commission? No. Why? Because what we should be asking is what information wasn't shared and wasn't told by the 9/11 Commission.
One of the one of
That's
the
important.
one of the
That's
most important things that I've learned is it's what isn't shared in these hearings.
yes.
That and I learned that by reading up on the church hearings and then reading up on Sidney Gottlieb and his
Oh,
ability to dodge the hearings for so long. And then when he got in there, he basically said nothing. And it
mm,
was like, and then you go back and you read the history of what he was involved in and what he was doing and how
mm,
he got away with basically saying nothing to nobody and being covered for by everybody. And I think he was only interviewed for like an hour, whereas most of these guys were interviewed for days. Right. And it was all because of of the operations that he was involved in and the connections he had with the Dulles brothers and all these other guys
mm.
that they were covering for Gottlieb, and they kept him for the most part out of the church committee altogether, minus a small amount,
Right.
and he was basically like seen as a scientist and an investigative scientist within the CIA because that's what everybody had testified that he was. So when he came in, he was like, look, I was just doing these experiments in these labs. I wasn't involved. I don't know what was going on with this, with MK Ultra and this, that, and the other. I had nothing to do with any of that stuff. And so this is I'm sorry, I'm having an internet issue again. I don't know what's happening tonight. Um, so you still there? Man, why is my internet connection unstable?
I don't know if you can hear me. Oh,
All right, yeah, you still there?
yep.
All right,
Your picture doesn't, your video
so
doesn't move, but I can hear you.
yeah, I don't know what's going on. I'm having for some reason my internet keeps disconnecting and reconnecting and disconnecting and reconnecting. It's acting real funny tonight,
It's
and
all
I
right.
don't
We're
I
talking
don't
about the
know.
most sensitive topic, so that,
Yeah, that could be have something to do with it. But the funny thing was with the Sidney Gottlieb, it was
mm,
like what he wasn't what he never testified to, what he was never questioned about is really what the most important part of the church committee was. And
uh, uh,
that's information that will probably never be fully known.
mm.
And you'll probably see very similar things with the 9/11 commission. It's like they might have gotten the guy in there on the stand, the guy that had all the answers, but they didn't know what to ask him because his cover was already made prior to him getting in on the stand.
Yeah, and similar to say the NSA and how they mismanaged the sharing of intelligence. Let me give you an example, right? In regards to the Malaysia summit meeting, which is the Al Qaeda meeting held in January 2000, the NSA, while listening to a phone call in December of 1999, heard a person by the name of Khalad. And at the time, they had no idea who this person was, but he was based in Malaysia. And he was talking to another person by the name of Khalid. Now, this would be Khalid Al Midar. And they found out that Khalid had oftentimes lived at the house owned by Ahmed Al Hada because he was married to the daughter Hoda Al Hada, and that made him his son in law. So they were talking about, Khalid kept talking about that Khalid and Nawaf, that's Nawaf Al Hazmi, were to attend a meeting in Malaysia on January 5th of 2000. And so the NSA said, all right, they're probably, we got to share this information because what the NSA doesn't do is they don't do human intelligence, meaning having people on the ground and taking pictures and whatnot. So what they were hoping for is this, is that they're going to tell the CIA about this meeting and the FBI in the hopes that they take photographs because they already know the names, but the CIA doesn't, and neither does the FBI. and the NSA doesn't tell them about the names of these people.
Mm.
So what they wanted was they wanted pictures to go along with the names that they're hearing on the phone. So the CIA does this, and they contact the Malaysian authorities about this condominium that was owned by a Indonesian businessman, Yazid Sufat, who basically was a member of a Al Qaeda affiliate organization named Jemaah Islamiyah, a terrorist organization deemed a terrorist organization by the United Nations. And so this meeting held the biggest names on earth in regards to terrorism. Some of them were Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ridwan Isamuddin, who went by the Nam Degor Hambali, a notorious bomber in Indonesia in the 1990s. Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, Fahad al-Quso, who was involved at some level with the USS Cole bombing, and a number of others went to this meeting of high contacts in Al-Qaeda and Jemaah Islamiyah. And so the Malaysian authorities took photographs of people coming in inside the house for those 3 days between January 5th and 8th. The NSA were listening to a cell phone that was held by Nawaf al-Hazmi. Now, when this photograph was sent to the CIA's counterterrorism center, it went to the Bin Laden unit, because that's who requested the photographs. The photographs were never shared with the NSA. So the CIA failed to give them the photographs. But the NSA were still listening to the phone calls of Nawaf al-Hazmi. Now, they left the meeting and they went to Bangkok. And around that same time, they knew they were coming to the United States because the CIA found out that both men, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, had U.S. visas, dual U.S. visas, not only just U.S. visas. So nobody knew about it except the CIA. And they had the picture of both men, two known Al-Qaeda operatives. These are not, rookies. They're known Al-Qaeda operatives.
Right.
And they were involved with, at some level with the East Africa bombings and the USS Cole later on. So the CIA does share this information with the FBI. Now, of all the agencies, the NSA knew about this. And meanwhile, the CIA goes to have a principals meeting. That means the meeting of all the top directors of intelligence and the Pentagon and the State Department. And what happens? Well, Richard Blee, who has replaced Michael Scheuer as the chief of station for Alex Station, says this: "We lost them. We have no idea where these two men are." My God, they just came from a high-level Al-Qaeda meeting, and you're telling me the CIA lost them? Well, this is the reason why they lost them, Tommy, is because they can't do operations inside the United States. But did they tell everybody at the principals meeting that two Al-Qaeda operatives were coming to the United States? No, they just said that they lost them. But the CIA lied. They knew they were coming to the United States, but so did the NSA. Now, the CIA doesn't have a monitor on Nawaf al-Hazmi's phone, but when they got to the United States and landed in LAX, Los Angeles International, there were only two agencies on the face of the earth that knew Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were inside the United States. Now, we talked about the CIA, but the NSA also knew. They kept this information from not just the FBI, but also from the State Department. So that means we have two agencies on record who kept sensitive and very pertinent information, not just from the Department of Justice, but also from the Department of State. The question is why? That's the most important question. Now, while they were inside the United States, both Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi made phone calls. And guess who was on the other end listening? The NSA.
NSA.
Not the CIA, but the NSA. Now, after the 9/11 attacks, Thomas Drake, who started work as the senior executive on September 11th, basically got all the information the NSA collected onto these CD-ROMs. And it was enormous amounts of terabytes. He handed it over to Maureen Baginski, the head of Signals Intelligence Directorate. And he told her what was on these. And she told him in no uncertain terms, "Tom, I wish you hadn't shown me this." Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that the NSA can no longer claim that they didn't know and that they didn't have plausible deniability, that they can't use later when it comes to investigations, that the NSA, yeah, we had information, but we didn't know what was on them. But they did know what was on them, and they didn't share it in time. But later on, during the 9/11 Commission and the Joint House, with the very few questions that they had for the NSA, Michael Hayden, the director, basically said, in no uncertain terms, we just didn't have enough manpower. If only we had enough manpower, we could stop terrorism. Well, in the days after 9/11, what did the Bush administration do? Did they go straight to the CIA? Did they go straight to the FBI? No, they went straight to the NSA. And they said, what more can you do for us? And Hayden meant, I'm required by law not to break US law in regards to privacy. And he was asked by George Tenet, of all people, that's not what was told to you. What more could you do? In other words, what illegal activities can you do? What can you do if we loosen those restrictions? And Michael Hayden basically said, I'll get back to you. And basically what happened was, later on, the NSA would be allowed, I use quotation marks, to tap every single phone owned to an American. And at that time, it still wasn't legal. But thanks to an investigation later on in 2006, in a San Francisco AT&T analyst by the name of Mark Klein, when he went to visit an AT&T office in San Francisco, he found a very strange room.
Yeah, I
And the room
remember
was
hearing
called
about this.
641A, and it was owned by the NSA. And what this room had was the NSA had built a bunch of buffers and interceptors that was collecting billions and billions of phone calls and emails of every single American in the United States. And later on, under the Obama administration, they built a complex called the Utah Data Center. And not many people know this place even exists. It's in Pine Bluff, Utah, and it's a center where it collects everybody's phone calls, everybody's text messages, and everybody's emails for all of time.
That's the center that Michael Bolden of the 10th Amendment Center had said that if Utah were to pass a law cutting off water to the center, it couldn't cool, and therefore it would be forced to shut down, and therefore a state could nullify federal intelligence agencies.
I think that's an ingenious idea. I'd love to see it happen, but unfortunately, they have all the information that they have. And although the NSA likes to claim that, yeah, we don't do it no more, yeah, they still do.
So
that's coming from former whistleblowers of the NSA and former employees of the NSA, like William Binney, Ed Loomis, Kirk J. Wiebe, and others.
Do you think, all right, so did the two jump rules start after the Patriot Act, or was that something they'd implemented in 96 when they went from bin Laden's phone to the phone in Yemen?
This is before the Patriot Act.
Right.
So what happened was that when they were monitoring bin Laden's satellite phone, they found out about the Yemen hub number, but this was not shared with any agency outside the NSA. It was closely guarded. In fact, Thomas Drake basically said the NSA hoarded information. In other words, they just collect information just for the sake of collecting it. But like I said, there was a detail unit in the NSA regarding just the Yemen hub itself. Whether they had that for bin Laden's satellite phone, I don't know, but we do know that they had a unit for the Yemen hub itself. And it was so important, this Yemen hub is so important, it's the epicenter of 9/11 because all the information is there. And if the NSA had a detailed small covert unit dedicated to it, then you damn well know that that was important enough, because they wouldn't even waste funds for, say, listening to, a phone call of past presidents and regarding, national security measures. This superseded everything
Mhm.
because this was the most important phone in the world. And that's not an exaggeration because the whole conduit of Al Qaeda was to contact this number in order to be patched. In other words, intelligence agencies in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia, they were monitoring members of Al Qaeda personally,
Mhm.
right? So they, if there was numbers from, say, Saudi Arabia to Afghanistan, which is a known hub for Al Qaeda, they would not allow that connection. However, they found a loophole that if we contact a number in Yemen and they contact us to Afghanistan, basically that's a conduit. That's why it was called a communications hub. But the whole world knew about this hub. And what's funny is those within the hub had no idea that the entire world was listening to them. And, you know, to me, Tommy, and, I'm glad you brought that up earlier, that there should be a FOIA request for all those. Can you imagine what's on those phone calls? I can't imagine. And Scheuer says, later on that, yeah, the gold mine is the NSA, but he says that the transcripts itself are the epicenter of not just 9/11, but the 19 East Africa bombings, the USS Cole, the Millennium Plot, and God knows what else.
Mm. Yeah, that's wild. I mean, just the amount of information that they and you saying they were gathering information just to gather information is so insane. It's like what were you created for? What was your job? Your
Mhm.
job was
Mhm.
just to gather information to have it? Like, so if something happened, then that people could come ask you, or were you supposed to be funneling information? Like, where the compartmentalization from the CIA to all the other intelligence agencies makes sense to me because of the way the CIA operated, right?
Right, right.
I get that. Like, I've read enough. I understand the operations of the CIA to understand pretty much how they worked. And even internally within the agency itself, it was so compartmentalized. A lot of people didn't know what was going on, um, other than those involved in specific uh, programs. But when you think about somebody like an agency like the NSA, that's entire job is to collect information on from foreign sources. Now, what are you supposed to do with that information? Are you just supposed to have it, or are you supposed to be dispersing that information to other agencies so that they have the information to operate on?
Um, when I interviewed Anthony Schaefer, who was part of Able Danger, the DI operation involving metadata for the Defense Intelligence Agency, he once said, I naively believed that we were all on the same page, meaning the NSA, CIA, FBI, and the DIA. But he found out later that each agency was not a victim, but instead they were all hiding information from one another. And that the information that they shared was information that the other agency already had known, or was information that was too vague and they couldn't encapsulate, couldn't act on it. So, in other words, there's a lot of blame to go around here.
Mm.
Now, what we can't do is basically say which agency is to blame for not sharing specifics. Well, I would say to you that that agency is the NSA. I think I'm 99% convinced through my convictions and through my studies that the NSA knew about the operation because it was talked about on the phones. And I think that they knew.
Yeah,
Now, does that mean everybody is? No, I think the people within that unit, and of course the director had to know Michael Hayden.
there was back in World War II, there was a cryptographic agency. It was called what was it called? Man, it was like the black the black voice or the black agency or something
Hmm.
like that, right? and they were the agency that had tapped into the Nazis' communication lines, and they were they were interpreting their codes, and they were breaking the cryptography, right? And that agency is what the NSA had kind of evolved out of, right? Kind of like that the CIA came out of the OSS. This black agency is where the NSA had evolved out of, and the entire job in World War II was to break the cryptography of the Nazis, and therefore be able to break their code and relay the messages and give up the intelligence to the military. And from what I understand, that is where this NSA's origin story starts. It's really hard to find anything on the origin story of the NSA, but from what I understand, that's where it starts. And there's a book about it, and it was written by one of the guys that was a cryptographer that worked for the agency, and it was a pretty interesting book. I found it online. It was free. It was a free PDF I found online. I'll see if I can't find it again, and I'll send it to you if I can.
Oh, please do. I love
Yeah.
books detailing signals intelligence, anything about the history.
But
Yeah,
I couldn't find it for sale. I could only find the PDF, and it was written very much like a memoir or like a diary, and really detailing how he had helped develop this agency and what their goals were. And it was quite interesting. And it just seems to me that if your entire job is to collect information, after that, it should be to sort that information, break those codes, whatever those codes may be, and to pass along that information to the people that can take action. Because the NSA does not have an actions department. Like, you know what I'm saying? The actions department of the NSA would be the CIA or naval intelligence or, the DOJ or whoever. And so it's very odd to me that they fell into this area, this specific area where they felt like their only job was to collect the information, not distribute the information, not sort the information, not, kind of make sense out of the information that they're collecting. Their only job was to have it and store it. It's like they become a storage facility.
Yeah, there's there's an outstanding author, James Bamford, who's considered the primary author in regards to the NSA. He wrote a book called Body of Secrets, and later on, The Shadow Factory. Both are phenomenal works regarding the details of the NSA. And he basically said that the NSA had a joke inside their office. Was the NSA really meant was never share anything. That's what the joke was. And that as long as you hoard information, and if that information is important and pertinent, then you're considered the lead agency in that regard, whether it be 9/11 or World War III or whatever. But each agency loves to attain that information, and this is the reason why they don't like sharing it. And sharing is that each agency wants to be the agency that saves the day of so sort. So we had this information, we shared it. In other words, bigger contracts from the federal government. So in regards to 9/11, it was the opposite. They had information. The one conspiracy, the fringe conspiracy theorists love to believe is that, oh, these agencies didn't have information because they didn't share information because they didn't know anything. No, the opposite was true. They were awash in it, and that they could have acted on it. And that's not coming from me. That's coming from former employees of each agency. I've interviewed some of them, Mark Rossini, Eric Kleinsmith, Anthony Schaefer, Ken Williams. A lot of these are all whistleblowers. They got in trouble for what they were saying. Nevertheless, the NSA, God sakes, if Michael Schur is saying he's the CIA's deputy chief of station. He's saying that the NSA is the gold mine, and he's like, very arrogant in his own right. I mean, if he's saying it, then what does that mean? Yeah, the NSA was indeed the primary agency regarding 9/11. And
Right.
this is the reason why I hone in on this agency itself, because the whole world needs to see this information. And if that information exists, Tommy, well, it's we could crack 9/11 right here. Inside job? Well, yeah. I think that would be, I hate that term, by the way. This would be the biggest story in human history regarding that, we could have stopped 9/11 from even happening. And like I said, that's not, I'm not saying that's Thomas Drake and William Binney, Kirk J. Wiebe, and Ed Loomis. And, all those people got in big trouble and they didn't commit any crimes. They
Yeah.
just, told the truth. But, the truth certainly didn't set them free.
That's true. Yeah, for sure. If anything, it
So,
made it restricted them even more.
yeah. And look, I'll bring up one incident too, because people would say, well, why'd you say 1992? In the mid 90s, after the World Trade Center bombing and after the Khobar Towers bombing, the FBI was in charge of that investigation, by the way. The FBI put out a memo to the CIA saying, what do you know about this Osama bin Laden? Because back in 95, they didn't know who he was. Very minimum, at the minimum. CIA brought over to the FBI. Now, we're talking about the New York office, the prominent office of counterterrorism in the
Mm.
country. They brought over 40 thick files on Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. Jack Clunan, who I mentioned before, I'm sorry, Dan Coleman, who worked out of the New York office and later with he was on loan to the CIA's bin Laden unit, like Mark Rossini was out of New York. He began examining these files, by himself. And he said that the NSA and the CIA were wiretapping bin Laden's phones and Al Qaeda's phones all the way back to Khartoum, Sudan. That's before he even went back to Afghanistan in 96.
Yeah.
And that's from 1991 to 96 because he gets expelled in 96. So if Dan Coleman and Jack Clunan and other people like Frank Pellegrino basically will say that the NSA were monitoring bin Laden satellite phones even before.
Oh, come on, man. Come on.
Days of the bombing. Before.
All right, hold on. We had another jump out.
Is over, or they plead guilty, I'm going to be the first one to
Hold on, buddy.
request.
Hold on. I lost connection again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So sorry.
All right.
So you were talking about they had access to the phone before, and then that's when it kind of cut out.
Yeah, what happened was that Dan Coleman, the FBI, requested information from the CIA.
Mm.
He got back these 40 thick files, and this is 95, right? So he assumed that the NSA and the CIA, knew about bin Laden even before he relocated back to Afghanistan in 96.
Okay.
All of this information was coming from while he was in the Sudan from 1992 to 96. So that means the NSA had probably were monitoring whatever phones they were given in the Sudan. So that means 10 years prior to the 9/11 attacks, the NSA were listening to phone calls belonging to this mysterious Saudi that nobody hardly any knew in the United States, Osama bin Laden.
And there could have already been communications with the house in Yemen at that point in time.
Yeah, that very well could be the case. But like I said, I don't know.
Right.
So we don't know what's on those transcripts. And like I said, if this trial ever comes to an end or they plead guilty, I'm going to be the first one to file a FOIA. I would like to think that somebody else will do it before me because, hey, there's other interests. It's great.
Right.
But there is no interest in what we're saying today. And that's really unfortunate because right here is the epicenter of pre-intelligence 9/11, and it is the deal breaker.
Hmm.
It is. It basically is. Either they had information that they could have stopped 9/11, so that means why didn't they? Or that Al Qaeda didn't talk about 9/11 at all, and that they weren't involved. Well, that would mean that who the hell were those people? Where did they come from? And that would mean that the federal government lied to us about this story of 19 Al Qaeda and bin Laden involved. So either way, whatever scenario, it doesn't look good for the intelligence community, the NSA, CIA, and the federal government.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop. And I don't want to keep fighting this internet. I'm gonna have to see what the hell is going on with this.
Well, we said a lot there.
Yeah, no, we got through a lot. It's just irritating me. I'm like, I don't like this. so it's one of those things. It's like in my mind, I'm like thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, how do I stop this from happening?
Keep stopping it.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't mind to do it. Yeah, you're automatic. So like, I'll talk to you, and if we have to do it over again, we'll do it over again.
No, we're not gonna.
We did a good recording.
Yeah, no, I think I'll have to go back and edit a little bit, but like I'm not that concerned with that. We got a lot of information in here. We might do an NSA part 2 at some point if you feel like you didn't cover everything, and then
no, we all the important stuff was recorded today.
All right, cool. Then we're good. I guess we're looking at Patriot Act next week.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm uploading the Patriot Act right now in my WordPress.
Yeah, so we'll get into the Patriot Act and what it meant and when it was written, because that's one of those questions that I find very interesting.
Oh yeah.
And how does it affect us today? Is it being used against American citizens?
Yeah, I think that's a yes.
All right. Well, all right, man. I'm going to stop the recording. Oh, plug, man. Before I do that, plug.